I'm Jim Fadiman, and I'm an independent researcher, and my current area of interest is microdosing psychedelics.
And how did you land in that field?
Yeah, I came into this really accidentally because a good friend of mine, Robert Fort, told me about microdosing and that Albert Hofmann had done it. And I just had no idea that low doses were of any value or even existed. And I got very curious and started asking how it could work and who was doing it and what it was like. And now, 5 years later, I've got hundreds of reports and about 1,000 people as subjects in a kind of researchy way where they're doing checklists every day and writing reports. So we're learning a great deal about a whole new family of uses in the psychedelic community.
So what particular psychedelics have you worked with?
Predominantly, and this again, people tell us, predominantly LSD and mushrooms of about 6 or 7 varieties. We do have some reports of ibogaine, some of ayahuasca, some of what are called the alpha-betamines, all the kind of curious variations on predominantly LSD or mescaline.
And how have your experiences been with plant-based psychedelics as opposed to like more designer drugs?
When you're doing microdosing, it's very much harder to make the distinction because you don't have the body load difference, meaning anyone can tell the difference between LSD and ayahuasca in about an hour. It takes no brains. But with microdosing, you're dealing with much more subtle energies. And so what we're finding is much less difference between substances. Certainly between mushrooms and LSD, we can't distinguish. Between some of the other substances, we probably can distinguish only because there's still a little body load. But we're not distinguishing too much on effects.
So it's interesting for me to hear you say that because I haven't actually done, I haven't done LSD, I haven't done anything really, I've only worked with plant medicine. So for me, just personally, I sort of have a sense of it almost being a quasi-spiritual thing. Like I feel like there's a great, like there's something kind of like communicating.
Well, the difference between plant medicines and synthetics, let's call it, from the plant medicine point of view, one is plants create substances, the other, human beings create substances. So from my point of view, it's not that far away. However, plants are inherently produce a much more complicated set of chemicals. Mescaline contains 40 more alkaloids. The peyote cactus contains 40 more alkaloids. How many have we studied? 3. Ibogaine has what, about 19 alkaloids. What do we know about them? Almost nothing. So when you're dealing with plant medicine, you're dealing with a very complicated, sophisticated system that's taken 10 to 30 million years to develop. And there's a reason for all those alkaloids. It may not have anything to do with human beings. It may only be because that particular combination makes a particular beetle think it ate something yucky. Or it may be something much more sophisticated than we can think. So we're dealing also with plant spirits. LSD does not have a spirit. No one ever says, "Mama LSD," because they're not feeling a presence. And no one also has dialogues. People don't dialogue with LSD. And as you know, at least with ayahuasca, there are arguments, let alone discussions, between you and Mama Ayahuasca. So we're dealing with simply different, it's a little bit like different stations on the radio. It's all radio, but the rock station and the evangelical station really are different. But it's still 99% the same, noise and frequencies and vibrations.
So in your personal experience, do you think that dialogue that you spoke about with plant-based medicine, what is significant about that, or is it significant at all when you're dealing with those smaller doses?
My understanding and my way of thinking about it is, and I'll just talk about ayahuasca because I think I understand it a little better. Ayahuasca has an agenda. And that's an agenda which is to stop destroying the planet. It's a very strong ecological message. Regardless of what else you're getting out of an ayahuasca experience, you're going to come away feeling that you would like the natural world not to be destroyed. Now, why is ayahuasca suddenly perseverating across the planet practically faster than you can grow it? Well, this is my theory, is ayahuasca was fine seeing the way people treated each other as long as they killed each other. But when they started killing plants, ayahuasca said this is not correct. And the peculiarity of the teacher plants, and we know there are more than one, but ayahuasca is the one we know best, tobacco certainly is another, and so forth. But these are plants who have been given the job of dealing with us. And I bet that they didn't ask for it. You know, I have this imaginary Congress of the plants and says someone's going to have to talk to humans. Who's going to do it? I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to touch them. They're so stupid. They're dirty. They don't have any roots. They get nothing. But out of that comes an agenda that says we have to honor and respect nature. And if we honor and respect nature, our own inner psychology will be healthier. Now, this is exactly the opposite of the Western way of working, which is let's deal with your childhood traumas, and then when you're a nice human being, maybe you'll feel better about nature. I think ayahuasca's got a much smarter way of going at it, which is let's make it clear to you, one, you're a very physical being, and two is so's every other being. And yes, there are spirit beings, and yes, there are the little teeny doctors that come and heal you, and yes, the snakes will eat you, and so forth. But that's all kind of theater for the basic message that ayahuasca has, which is basically love the planet, respect the plants, and stop killing each other.
So what greater cultural shift do you think is going to happen as more and more people use plant medicines like ayahuasca? Microdosing is becoming an increasingly popular topic.
Well,
like how is the cultural landscape going to change in the Western world?
The hope is that the cultural change will happen in time. I mean, there are two, let's think kind of simplistically, there's the Greenland ice sheet, which if it slips off of Greenland, is the oceans raise maybe 6 or 8 feet in a day. That will inundate all the major ports of the world, which will also destroy all the infrastructure that moves oil from ships onto land. So you really can end civilization with an overnight in climate change. That's what we're looking against. Now, the plants and the friends of the plants, who hopefully is us, are working to prevent that, are working to slow it down. It's not clear how it's going to work out. The chances are, after the worst is over, if we assume the worst, there'll still be plants. And that's fine. But I think ayahuasca, in a way, is compassionate and saying we're not actually just trying to save plants, we're trying to save all species. So it's kind of the Noah's Ark of plants.
And what role do you think it has, if any, ayahuasca, in the evolution of the human species? Or is it just talking to us because it's worried about its own survival, or do you think it's going to have a greater purpose in our own evolution?
There's a question whether we have evolved much in the past 5,000 years. And if you read the ancient Greeks and you read Greek tragedy and you read Plato, it looks like the same, both goodness and silliness is pretty much unchanged. So evolution in human beings has been very slow. Marijuana plants, evolution has been very fast because they've been interested in evolution. Human beings haven't really been interested in evolution. They've been interested still in survival and greed and power and whatever, nationalism and so forth. What's happening with the aid of the plants is an opportunity for people to live in a way that, not probably genetic change, but maybe what we're now calling epigenetic change, is more likely. The notion somehow is that people who are healthy literally shift the balance in the species. And this is true in any species.
And so on that note, what would you like someone who's watching, who, you have a lifetime of experience with this, how, moving forward, what do you think the next steps are in discovering all of the great potential in these tools that we've been given to help ourselves and the planet, etc.
I actually am thinking, as I've gotten older, in smaller steps. And I'm thinking of the Dalai Lama, who was asked about war and so forth, and he said, there's always going to be war. We could have, however, less large weapons. And if we had less guns and less weapons, we would kill less of us. That would be a great improvement. And what I'm seeing from the plants is they're saying, if you would take care of a few plants more often and understand that the trees are sentient beings and are talking to one another, so that you don't try and interrupt them with lumbering. That these are ways of restoring human beings back into the habitat. And no animal shits in its nest. That just isn't the way it is. You may do it very close. I'm thinking of some birds. But we don't try and harm ourselves. And if we are part of the habitat, we don't harm our home. And this loss of being part of the natural world is what ayahuasca and the other plant teachers are, I think, trying to say. And there's some side effects that I don't think people understand. For instance, purging is described by many, many people as this important psychodynamic event. But if I actually look as what I understand it is, when you're living in the rainforest, the chances of intestinal parasites are extraordinarily high. If you have a really good purgative, it will heal, it will basically clean out your parasites. I have a daughter who's an ethnobotanist, and we know about her getting parasites and so forth. So it looks like, my understanding is, one of the main physical effects of ayahuasca is because it's working in its own environment. And that purging, when you're taking it in an ayahuasca circle in Los Angeles with someone who has no idea what they're doing, it doesn't have the same value.
Do you think setting isn't really, like the traditional setting is quite important to explore?
Either a traditional setting or one that has the same effect. See, I'm not sure that a Shipibo is going to come out, that's a good setting for someone who grew up in Alabama. And I'm thinking when Ram Dass came back to the United States and was wearing a dhoti, a great kind of brown dress, and eating chapatis. And it felt contrived, because he was really a kind of son of a Jewish lawyer from New York. So the question of set and setting, I think, is fundamental. The question of what's the correct set and setting for a given plant is not as clear. And the instructions that were given appropriate to Peru or Ecuador may not be appropriate for Phoenix or Philadelphia. And I don't know about that, but not having any set and setting, no context, is terrible.
And so from that perspective, when people are wanting to explore psychedelic medicine for various reasons and purposes, should their ability to experience, should set and setting come before the choice of medicine? Like, for example, like working with mushrooms, if someone has the option to go between psilocybin or ayahuasca, and they don't have the ability to travel to
Sure.
Peru, for example.
I think really the question is more, what is their intention? If their intention is to become aware of themselves as part of the natural world, the plant medicines are clearly superior. If their intention is to have a transcendental experience in, say, a Buddhist sense, where you get a sense of that everything is an illusion and that the death and life are an illusion, probably ayahuasca is not my choice, because it doesn't seem to give people that experience, or it doesn't very easily. And we forget that Westerners have their own demand system, which are foreign to the native people using plant medicines. For example, Maria Sabina, who was the person that gave Gordon Wasson the mushrooms that opened up psilocybin to the world again. She said, until the gringos came, no one ever asked to see God. people came to me and they wanted healing and divination. They wanted to know where their relatives were, and they wanted healing. But the gringos all have this desire to see the divine, the deity. And it didn't work very well. She kept her set and setting, but her set and setting, but the expectations of the people that came were so different. And eventually she had a very difficult life for many, many years. And at one point the village burned her house down because she'd really made the whole village didn't work as well.
So taking from that story, so as we're, talking about psychedelics, of plant intelligence, to a lot of people still in the Western world, that would sound crazy
weird, right?
And weird.
Yeah.
So, how can we reconcile, make this jump between, people like us having these conversations, being open to these things, ideologies, phenomenon that we are only just on the brink of really understanding?
I know the answer. Documentary films. That's the answer.
I concur.
And in a real sense, the value of a documentary film is that people stop and pay attention for a certain amount of time, and that if you know how to cut an interview, people will say what you want. And one of the things is you can get people to come to their own conclusions without ever having to say what they should be. You set up a kind of pattern which leads inevitably to a conclusion that is in the direction that you and the plant spirits think are acceptable. And if I were making this film, one of the things I would certainly do, and you may have done, and that's how you might have started, is say to ayahuasca, oh, look, I want to make a documentary film, and I'd like a little help. And ayahuasca says, I don't know anything about film, but I know a lot about stories. And why don't you do the story this way? And so I'm being, kind of funny, but not at all unserious.
No, I know exactly what you mean. So I'm curious, how is the cultural landscape of using plants and other medicines different from when you first started out doing the work that you're doing to now?
Well, when I first started working with psychedelics in 1961, nobody I knew had ever heard of them, including me. And I was totally surprised when I was offered psilocybin in a capsule by Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass. It had nothing to do with my life. I didn't drink coffee till I was 50. So I'm I'm really dull for this kind of work. But I found out that almost everything that I thought was so was a limited case of what is so. So it's like I lived in a very small town and suddenly I'm in Paris. And when you take psychedelics in Paris, you're in a much larger setting. And there's a World War I song that says, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? After people have had an expanded view of reality, you can't go back. It's like before when you were 10 or 11, you thought whatever sex was, it was yucky. You can't go back. And similarly with these plants, once you've opened up to this reality, then you are basically stuck open. So if I, for instance, talk about plant intelligences and spirit beings, and my own experience is very limited there, I'm very comfortable with that because it's simply an area that seems to be the best way to explain it. And one of the things that we know from the mystical literature, and there's a wonderful description by St. John of the Cross, where God says that we're not, the vision you have is not what is so, but it's taken down. It's like changing your voltage so you don't blow your little machine out. You go from 220 direct to 110, so that you can get it. But the current is not 110. And so when you see the angels or the gates of heaven in this description, God says that isn't what's so, but that's as much as you can handle. And that makes great sense to me. And I've had a psychedelic experience when I knew much, much more than I ever could know. And then the inner being said, Jim Fadiman, you'll never understand this. And I said, well, what's the point of that? She says, well, you can relax about it. You know, and the vision I have is like taking a parrotfish from a reef with, 8,000 species. And you say to the parrotfish, you lived here all your life. Uh-huh. Tell me about the ecology of the reef. He says, the ecology of the reef? I have the brain the size of a peanut. I'm a parrotfish. I can function fine, but don't ask me about the ecology of the reef. That's not within the purview of this species. But if you ask me, where's there good things for parrotfish to eat, I can be helpful. And I think as human beings, we're in a similar position. And when we are taught by an intelligence greater than ourselves, it's at first, it's a shift in awareness. When we were small children, there's something called, let's ask the big kids. And when you're an adult, one of the things you realize often with sadness, there are no more big kids. And then when you find there's a spirit intelligence or a spiritual teacher, or you go to a university and there's just someone who knows way more than you do about something you want, you either feel smaller or better. I happen to feel better when I get information that is far beyond my own ken.
So I love that, how you talk about, like a mind, just, it's open and it can't close again. I really relate to that. But do you think Western culture, for example, as a whole is ready for that? Like, there's an increasing amount of people who are using psychedelics, and at the same time, the existing, power structures, like systems of living,
sure.
They can't keep going.
Well, the question is, are we ready for the change? And the answer is, we never are. I have a kind of rule of thumb, and I've advised people who pay me to do that. Don't wait till you're ready to start. Start and learn what you need to do to continue. So Western culture could certainly manage to stop doing war, to stop hurting women. It's like, gee, is the society in Egypt ready to stop genital, destruction? And the answer is no, but let's do it anyway. Because all the women involved are more than ready not to have their bodies hurt and have their ability to feel sexual pleasure destroyed for life. They're ready. So we're not going to wait for the people who have no idea what women are going through to tell us it's okay. There's a kind of notion in the little business world, which is it's a lot easier to apologize than ask for permission. So I think let's change Western culture and make it wonderful, and then apologize.
Do you think the change is inevitable? Obviously there's a growing movement to be open to this, this work. Could it go the other way? Is there enough resistance to it that it could still get stamped out and we could end up moving backwards?
Well, when you've been through the 60s, when we were open in every direction and we all held hands and waited for prosperity, and we're very surprised when everybody got, so many people got mad at us. And we were repressed, and the whole culture basically sank. And we have not yet come back to the level of the 60s. Though during that time, we created Earth Day, we created ecology, we created the women's movement. We did a huge amount to open up the world to being a more humane place. We were then basically squashed. And we're now, in a sense, trying again, hopefully smarter. It didn't occur to us in the 60s that everybody wouldn't want to change. We now know better. And we may lose. If you look at history, history is made up of empires that are really quite worthy, that then become unworthy, and then become unwieldy, and then become mean, and end up, instead of having any moral leadership, they move to military power, and then they go broke. And so we're now at the United States is at the end of that era. We're now into the going broke and only using military to have power. And the psychedelic movement will never be crushed because you can't stop mushrooms from growing. You can't stop ayahuasca vines from growing. And as you know, there's, you don't need the two plants, you need 1 and 100 other plants work. So the plants are going to do fine, and that may keep us going. So I'm not either optimistic or pessimistic, but it may take more cycles. And from a personal standpoint, and having children and grandchildren, that would make me sad. But if I'm looking at the species, if I'm looking at the world the way plants do, we'll probably work it out.
And then, so when you're talking about, next generation coming and, experiencing all these things, exploring them, pushing for change, as someone who has been through this, in your lifetime, what, thoughts, advice, general,
sure.
I mean, for that next generation?
The main advice is, one, listening to much older people usually is not very useful in a culture that's moving very quickly. So, which is why that I don't use as much of my iPhone as you do. I'll bet. However, what I do know, if you don't try, you never win. And it's not how many times you fail. And this is a truism, but it's a wonderful, it's probably ancient Chinese, which is if you fall 7 times and get up 8, things are going fine. And if you don't have some failures in your life, you're not taking any risks. And if you have only failures, you better let someone else run your life, because you're really not, it isn't about risks, it's you just don't know what you're doing. How's that?
That's great. And then I'm just curious, what's next in your own psychedelic exploration? Are you sort of, do you feel like you've really reached the pinnacle of your exploration and your knowledge, and you've accomplished so much in your career? Are you still, moving forward? Do you have more?
My goal is to complete the basic fundamental work of microdosing, so that harder science can then take it in any direction that it goes, because it has many directions. So in a sense, we're saying, look, we found a continent, and we've got there's a mountain here, and there's a lake here, and we've got 2 rivers, maybe 3, we don't know. But it's a whole continent, and go at it. Because everything we found so far looks terrific. And there are a few terrible places over here called anxiety, don't go there. But there's so many areas that look interesting. Now, for instance, the fact is, since I gave a talk 2 days ago about the possibility that one person stopped having hair loss during microdosing, I now have 2 people, the other being one of the journalists who's here. That makes it, in the science world, 2 is way, way bigger than 1. And I'm saying, well, I'm not going to explore hair loss. One is, I've already done all the hair loss I want to do. And 2 is, that's not my interest. But there are people for whom that's a really exciting research area, and wouldn't it be wonderful if people didn't have to lose their hair for various reasons. On the other hand, here's another group that says treatment-resistant depression isn't necessarily resistant to microdosing. Well, that's huge. That's a big piece of the culture. That's, we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. That's another exploration, but that's not the kind of exploration that I would do. My job is pretty well done, which is microdosing is now out in the world. It's being self-studied by thousands of people in many, many countries. Scientists are now going to move in and do the work they should do. And I have other things that I want to do with my life.
So you feel like your work is...
Yeah, I feel that this is time to start moving towards completion. And the way you do that when you have a massive amount of data is you can either analyze it for years and just churn out papers, and if I were ambitious, and if I take the database, which is what we intend to do, and basically say to the scientific community, Here is the database. Here's how to enter it. Here's what you can get from it. It's online.
It's interesting because your career has expanded such a fascinating time of growth in
Right.
this field. Do you think, obviously, probably the next generation of scientists are going to experience that same excitement? Do you think that we're really coming to, after that, do you think we're coming to an end of the discovery in terms of plant medicines and psychedelics? Do you think it's going to kind of flatten out, or do you think there's always going to be more to discover, whether it's with the specific entities of the plants or ways to use them, like for example microdosing?
There's a general rule in studying history that if you want to go down in history as a jerk, say that something's over. Okay? And there's some wonderful famous people that say physics in like in 1875, we've done it, we've found everything. And every 20 or 30 years somebody says that, well, we've done it, we've now found we've handled our, agriculture. We now know how to really grow everything. And then, of course, the super weeds happen and so forth and so on. The nature is quite, I think, enjoys some variety. That's why there's more than one kind of fish. We don't need more than one kind of fish, but it's kind of nice to have 100,000 kinds of fish. So there's a joyfulness in the natural world, an exuberance in diversity, which keeps interesting things happening. So if we go to Mars, wouldn't it be fun if there's something on Mars that lets us know that life may occur everywhere? Okay, remember, we used to think the Earth was the center of the universe. And then we got that the sun was the center of the universe. Then we got the sun is like, a fifth-rate star in a third-rate galaxy in some little corner of space. So the universe isn't begun to show us what's going on. We are, at best, smart parrotfish.